All right, and we're live now. All right, I am your host, Imperator of Forge, and I'm going to talk about the Rosicrucian origins of the USA and how, being like a so-called patriot means absolutely nothing. Okay, if anything, the United States is just basically an idea or a concept of a handful of 17th century Rosicrucians, 16th and 17th century Rosicrucians. And George Washington is actually not the founding father of the American Republic. I'm going to actually later on, I'm going to try to do some research about Rosicrucian history of the United Kingdom, Italy, Europe, and France, because I think the involvement of these secret societies it goes deeper there than it does over here. Actually, you trace it back far enough, and it goes back to Babylon. Um, Obviously, it didn't start in Europe; it started in the Middle East. With the mystery schools and stuff. But I can't talk secret societies throughout the world, Western, Eastern, and whatnot, in one stream. It would just be too long. I imagine that, like, when it comes to Egypt, Babylon, Britain, France, or Francia, Europe, Rome, and Greece, the secret societies there are go back much more deeper. And I would like to do like a breakdown and a dissection of the history of secret societies in the UK, in Great Britain from the Renaissance down to the 20th century. Loveless says, good morning. All right, so Forge King! I am still a heart man! Let's go! All right, I want to talk about today the Rosicrucian origins of the U.S., Saint Germaine, Comte de Saint Germaine, Lorenzo Ricci, and Francis Bacon, or Sir Francis Bacon. And I probably will not go too deeply into Sir Francis Bacon. But anyways, let's see here. All right, are we screen sharing? Yes, all right. The mysterious Rosicrucian, who was the father of the American Republic. Saint Germain twice mentioned his role as the unknown professor at the signing of the Declaration of Independence on an hour with an angel on August 6, 2015. I get the sense that he wants us to look more closely at his example and understand his intimate role in the founding of that country. Throughout his life, Francis Bacon's fondest hope was the creation of a utopia across the Atlantic. Actually, there had been, ever since Thomas More wrote his novel Utopia in 1516. So Europeans had actually been talking about starting a new republic since Nicholas of Cusa and since Francis Bacon and Sir Thomas More. But anyways, Sir Francis Bacon's fondest hope was the creation of a utopia across the Atlantic. The realization of his new Atlantis in the form of a society of free men governed by sages and scientists, in which his Freemasonic and Rosicrucian principles would govern the social, political, and economic life of the new nation. It was for this reason why, as Lord Chancellor, he took such an active interest in the colonization of America, and why he sent his son to Virginia as one of the early colonists, most prominent among whom were George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, that he hoped to create a new nation dedicated to his political philosophy. In his Secret Destiny of America, Manly P. Hall, and this is interesting because I know this Canadian guy, and he's from the same town as Manly P. Hall. And this guy is constantly like going at me about how great the American Constitution is. And he's from the same town as Manly P. Hall. I find that intriguing. In his Secret Destiny of America, Manly Hall, Bacon's most understanding modern scholar, refers to the appearance of in America prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776 of a mysterious Rosicrucian philosopher, a strict vegetarian who ate only foods that grew above the ground, who was a friend and teacher of Franklin and Washington, and who seemed to have played an important role in the founding of the new republic. Why most historians fail to mention him is a puzzle. I think that I could find more than one excuse of knowing why he's not brought up. For that, he existed is a certainty. He was known as the Professor. Together with Franklin and Washington, he was a member of the committee selected by the Continental Congress in 1775 to create a design for the American flag. The design he made was accepted by the committee and given to Betsy Rose to execute into the first model. A year later, on July 4th, 1776, this mysterious stranger, whose name nobody knew, suddenly appeared in Independence Hall and delivered a stirring address to the fearful men there gathered, who were wondering whether they should risk their lives as traitors by affixing their names to the memorable document which Thomas Jefferson wrote, and whose ideals Francis Bacon, founder of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism, was the true originator. The flag unfurled at Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1775, which the professor designed, symbolized the union of the colonies. It was called the Grand Union Flag, and its design was as follows. In the blue field of the upper left-hand corner was the white diagonal cross of St. Andrews. And interesting that this is the same design that the Confederate flag uses, actually. This is the same design that the Confederate flag has. Interesting. Imposed on this was the Red Cross, which was given the name of St. George. The 13 stripes, 7 of red and 6 of white, alternating in the flag, represented the 13 colonies. The flag was used for some time, but owing to its similarity with the British flag, which supposedly symbolized the unity of England and Scotland, considerable controversy arose over it. In order to overcome this objection, in 1776, it was decided to design another flag which would follow the spirit of the original design, and the inverted triangle over the upright triangle, generally known as the St. Andrew's Cross, a Masonic symbol of Kabbalistic origin, and denoting that the originator of the flag was a Freemason and Rosicrucian, was preserved by using a six-pointed star, placed in irregular fashion on a blue background in the form of a new constellation. When General Johnson and Dr. Franklin visited Mrs. Elizabeth Rose, otherwise known as Betsy Rose, to get her cooperation in making the flag, the five-pointed star appealed to her as being more beautiful than the six-pointed star of the professor's original design, which the committee accepted. Hence, out of deference to her sense of beauty, the five-pointed stars were used instead, and 13 of them were placed in a circle on a blue field with the standard 7 red and 6 white straps completing the flag. This simple flag was made just before the Declaration of Independence, although the resolution endorsing it was not passed by the Continental Congress until July 14, 1777. A second time did this mysterious stranger, the professor, whose name and origin was unknown, play a pivotal role in American history. This time it was at the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It was on June 7th, 1776, that Richard Henry Lee, a delegate from Virginia, offered in Congress the first resolution declaring that the United Colonies were and ought to be free and independent states. Soon after Mr. Lee introduced his resolution, he was taken sick and returned to his home in Virginia. Whereupon, on June 11th, 1776, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston were appointed as a committee to prepare a formal Declaration of Independence. On the 1st of July, 1776, the committee made its report to Congress. On the 2nd of July, Lee's resolution was adopted in its original words. During the 3rd of July, the formal Declaration of Independence was reported by the committee and debated with great enthusiasm. The discussion was resumed on the 4th, Jefferson having been elected as chairman of the committee. On July the 4th, there was great suspense throughout the nation. Many were adverse to severing the ties with the mother country, and many feared the vengeance of the king and his armies. Many battles had been fought already, with no decisive victory had been won by the rebel colonists. Each man in the Continental Congress realized, as Patrick Henry did, that it was either liberty or death. A rash move could mean death. After all, they were not free, but subjects of a king who considered them as rebels and could punish them accordingly. They could be convicted for treason and put to death. Just what connection did the mysterious stranger who designed the American flag and encouraged the signing of the Declaration of Independence have to Francis Bacon or Count Saint-Germain? Writing on this subject, Manly Hall says, "Many times the question has been asked, was Francis Bacon's vision of the new Atlantis a prophetic dream of the great civilization which was so soon to rise upon the soil of the New World? It cannot be doubted that the secret societies of Europe conspired to establish upon the American continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Two incidents in the early history of the United States evidence the influence of that secret body, which has so long guided the destinies of peoples and religions. By them, nations are created as vehicles for the promulgation of ideals, and while nations are true of these ideals, they survive. When they vary from them, they vanish like the Atlantis of old, which had ceased to know the gods." In his admirable little treatise, Our Flag, Robert Allen Campbell revives the details of an obscure but most important episode of American history, the designing of the colonial flag of 1775. The account involves a mysterious man concerning whom no information is available other than that he was on familiar terms with both General Washington and Dr. Benjamin Franklin. The following description of him is taken from Campbell's treatise. All right, so we're finally getting to the point. Little seems to have been known concerning this old gentleman, and in the materials from which this account is compiled, his name is not even once mentioned, for he is uniformly spoken of or referred to as the professor. He was evidently far beyond his 70 years, and he often referred to historical events of more than a century previous, just as if he had been a living witness to their occurrence. Still he was erect, vigorous and active, hale, hearty, and clear-minded, as strong and energetic every way as in the prime of life. He was tall, of fine figure, perfectly easy, very dignified in his manners, being at once courteous, gracious, and commanding. He was for those times, and considering the customs of the colonist, very peculiar in his method of living, for he ate no flesh, fowl, or fish. He never used for food any green thing, any roots, or anything unripe. He drank no liquor, wine, or ale, but confined his diet to cereals and their products, fruits that were ripened on the stern of in the sun, nuts, mild tea, and the sweet of honey, sugar, and molasses. Editor's note: the Comte de Saint-Germain's same abstemious behavior regarded food, same abstemious behavior regarding food was well documented in Europe. He was well educated, highly cultivated, and of extensive as well as varied information, and very studious. He spent considerable of his time in the patient and persistent scanning of a number of very rare old books and ancient manuscripts, which he seemed to be deciphering, translating, or rewriting. These books and manuscripts, together with his own writings, he never showed to anyone, and he did not even mention them in his conversations with the family, except in the most casual way, and he always locked them up carefully in a large, old-fashioned, cubically shaped, iron-bound, heavy oaken chest. Whenever he left his room, even for his meals, he took long and frequent walks alone, sat on the brows of the neighboring hills, or mused in the midst of the green and flower-gemmed meadows. He was fairly liberal, but in no way lavish in spending his money, with which he was well supplied. He was a quiet, though a very genial and very interesting member of the family, and he was seemingly at home upon any and every topic coming up in conversation. He was, in short, one whom everyone would notice and respect, whom few would feel well acquainted with, and whom no one would presume to question concerning himself, as to whence he came, why he tarried, or whether he journeyed. By something more than a mere coincidence, the committee appointed to the Colonial Congress to design a flag accepted on invitation to be guests, while at Cambridge, of the family with which the professor was staying. It was here that General Washington joined them for the purpose of deciding upon a fitting emblem. By the signs that passed between them, It was evident that General Washington and Dr. Franklin recognized the professor, and by unanimous approval, he was invited to become an active member of the committee. During the proceedings which followed, the professor was treated with the most profound respect, and all his suggestions immediately acted upon. He submitted a pattern which he considered symbolically appropriate for the new flag, and this was unhesitatingly accepted by the 6 other members of the committee, who voted for that the arrangement suggested by the professor be forthwith adopted. After the episode of the flag, the professor quickly vanished, and nothing further is known concerning him. Did General Washington and Dr. Franklin recognize the professor as an emissary of the mystery school which has so long controlled the political destinies of this planet? Benjamin Franklin was a philosopher and a Freemason, and possibly a Rosicrucian initiate. He and the Marquis de Lafayette, also a man of mystery, constitute 2 of the important links in the chain of circumstance that culminated in the establishment of the original 13 American colonies as a free and independent nation. Um, all right, I'm going to take a look at my audio right. All right, so it looks like the audio is going good. It looks like there might be a bit of a buffering disturbance. Take a look here. Dr. Franklin's philosophic attainments are well attested in Poor Richard's Almanac, published by him for many years under the name of Richard Sanders. His interest in the cause of Freemasonry is also shown in his publication of Anderson's Constitutions of Freemasonry. It was during the evening of July the 4th, 1776, that the second of these mysterious episodes occurred. In the old State House in Philadelphia, a group of men were gathered for the momentous task of severing the tie between the old country and the new. It was a grave moment, and not a few of those present feared that their lives would be the forfeit of their audacity. In the midst of the debate, a fierce voice rang out. The debaters stopped and turned to look upon the stranger. Who was this man who had suddenly appeared in their midst and had transfixed them with his oratory? They had never seen him before. None knew when he had entered, but his tall form and pale face filled them with awe, his voice ringing with a holy zeal. The stranger stared them to their very souls. His closing words rang through the building. God has given America to be free. As the stranger sank into a chair exhausted, a wild enthusiasm burst forth. Name after name was placed upon the parchment. The Declaration of Independence was signed. But there was the man who had precipitated the accomplishment of this immortal task, who had lifted for a moment the veil from the eyes of the assemblage and revealed to them a part at least of the great purpose for which the new nation was conceived. He had disappeared, nor was he ever seen or his identity established. This episode parallels others of a similar kind recorded by ancient historians attendant upon the founding of every new nation. Are they coincidence, or do they indicate that the divine wisdom of the ancient mysteries still is present in the world, serving mankind as it did of old? So, who was this person? Who was this man, you ask? All right. Um, okay, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Alrighty then. Let's close this. That's the Rosicrucian. Okay, share screen. There we go. All right, there we go. Just kind of go to that. All right. The Jesuit origin of the American flag. The ensign of the East India Company from 1707 to 1801. It has 13 stripes, just like the American flag. The East India Company, EIC, originally chartered as the Governor and Company of Merchants of London trading into the East Indies, and more properly called the Honourable East India Company, was an English and later from 1707 British joint stock company, formed to pursue trade with the East Indies that had ended up trading mainly with the Indian subcontinent, Qing Dynasty China, Northwest Frontier Province, and Balakistan. The company rose to account for half of the world's trade, particularly trade in basic commodities that included cotton, silk, indigo dye, salt, saltpeter, tea, and opium. The company also ruled the beginnings of the British Empire in India. Lorenzo Ricci, August 1st, 1703 to November 24th, 1775, was an Italian Jesuit, elected the 18th Superior General of the Society of Jesus. He was also the last before the suppression of the Jesuits in 1773. According to the book Rulers of Evil, Useful Knowledge About Governing Bodies by F. Tupper Saucy, Lorenzo Ricci played a key role. Lorenzo Ricci played a key role in the creation of the United States of America by creating the appearance of transition from English rule over the American colonies. He was one of the founding fathers of America that 99% of Americans have never heard of. The book suggests that Ricci may have faked his own death to come to America and meet up with the other founding fathers of America, especially when he met Benjamin Franklin. At the evening session, Benjamin Franklin turned the meeting over to his new-found and abundantly honored friend, who was also called the Professor, and who was very likely the retired Jesuit general Lorenzo Ricci. The subject was a flag. Addressing the committee as "Comrade Americans," the professor explained that, since the colonies were still dependent upon Great Britain, we are not expected to design or recommend a flag which will represent a new government or an independent nation, but instead one that will testify to our present loyalty as English subjects. A flag that was already in use, a flag that had been recognized by the British government for half a century, a flag having a field of alternate horizontal red and white stripes, with the Grand Union flag of Great Britain in the upper left corner. I refer, he said, to the flag of the East India Company. So my friend Rick Perry, or a friend of mine, his name is Rick Perry, and Rick Perry has pointed out and has given some references about the takeover or the infiltration of the Jesuits. This was after their suppression. The Jesuits were originally a religious, theocratical, militant order of monks that supported the Counter-Reformation. But by the 18th century Enlightenment, they had moved away from those vocations and started to get more involved in the East Indies trade. What happened was that the Catholic monarchies of Europe came to realize that the Jesuits were actively involved with the British East India Company and with Rosicrucians. And because of this Rosicrucian infiltration of the Jesuit order, they were suppressed all across Europe. And what happened is they went to Lutheran Prussia and Orthodox Russia, where Frederick the Great and Catherine the Great of Russia housed them and gave them accommodation and helped them out. Frederick the Great, I do believe, was a Knight of Malta, but Rick Perry has talked a bit about the mercantile control of or takeover of the Jesuit order. They were just basically a mercantile corporation controlled by the British East India Company by that point. To the flag of the East India Company, to hide the fact that Americans would be fighting under the private flag of an international mercantile corporation controlled by Jesuits. In fact, it was controlled by the British mercantile orders. They were just using the Rosicrucians and the Jesuits as a front. In reality, it was controlled by the mercantile orders. And also, the American Constitution was directly taken away borrowed from the Renaissance, the constitutions of Italian Renaissance republics. The professor provided a plausible cover whereby the flag would be explained to the masses. The Union flag of the mother country is retained in the Union, upper left corner of our new flag, to announce that the colonies are loyal to the just and legitimate sovereignty of the British government. The 13 stripes will at once be understood to represent the 13 colonies. Their equal width will type the equal rank, rights, and responsibilities of the colonies. The union of the stripes in the field of our flag will announce the unity of interest and the cooperative union of efforts which the colonies recognize and put forth in their common cause. The white stripes will signify that we consider our demands just and reasonable, and that we will seek to secure our rights through peaceable, intelligent, and statesmanlike means. If they prove at all possible, and the red stripes at the top and bottom of our flag will declare the first and last and always we have the determination, the enthusiasm, and the power to use force whenever we deem force necessary. The alternation of the red and white stripes will suggest that our reasons for all demands will be intelligent and forcible, and that our force in securing our rights will be just and reasonable. Yes, sir. A large majority of the leaders of public All right, so what that actually means is that the Declaration was signed on a very important celestial event around a solar eclipse. That is correct. 4th of July, 1776 occurred on a um, very specific time of a celestial event. That was why it was signed on that date. Yes, the Declaration of Independence was signed on the event of a major solar eclipse because it was planned out to be so. Masses of the people and a large majority of the leaders of public opinion desire a removal of grievances and a rectification of wrongs through a fuller recognition of their rights as British subjects, and a few of them desire, and very few of them expect at this time, a complete severance of their present political independent relations with the English government. That severance would occur before the sun in the next summer's strength, indicating that the professor knew, as Lorenzo Ricci would have foreknown, a July Declaration of Independence. At that time, the East India Company flag could be easily modified by replacing the Union Jack with stars against a blue background to make it announce and represent the new and independent nation. Washington and Franklin lavished the professor's idea with especial approval and unstinted praise. The committee formally and unanimously adopted the East India Company's banner, known as the 13 Stripes, as the general flag and recognized standard of the colonial army and navy. Just before midnight, they adjourned. On January 2nd, 1776, at a formal ceremony attended by the Flag Committee, George Washington personally hoisted the East India Company flag upon a towering and specially raised pine tree liberty pole, unfurling it to the breeze and displaying it for the first time. To his army, the citizens of the vicinity, and the British forces in Boston. The British officers at Charleston Heights perceived the event to mean that General Washington had thus announced his surrender to them. At once they saluted the 13 Stripes with 13 hearty cheers. They immediately followed this spontaneous outburst of British enthusiasm with a grander and more dignified official salute of 13 guns, the 13-gun salute being the highest compliment in gunpowder. The military God speed you. By so carefully equivocating both of his enemies, the professor had made himself god of confusion. The redcoats were toasting rulers of evil, the good health of the rebels, who in turn were fighting for the British East India Company. One of the few places in the world where such ludicrous phenomena are considered standard and routine is in the pages of Lorenzo Ricci's 13 articles. The general decides everything. He knows how to shape at will, not only the army he is commanding, but also. So, this is Ricci. This is the Comte de Saint Germain. Well, there we go. And he was a real person. Okay, so he was a real person. And by the way, he did not die in 1775. He actually didn't pass away until later. So the Jesuit order was suppressed in 1774, 1773. I'm sorry, American colonies. There we go. If we could just Germaine point. All right, so that's Sir Francis Bacon, Saint Germain, and Lorenzo Ricci. So what was going on was 1775 or so was a important celestial event that was going to happen. Let's return to the ancient world. And the purpose of the Enlightenment was to create a religion as an alternative for Christianity. The Enlightenment was the greater amplification of what was first practiced and experimented in the Renaissance. And it was an atavistic return to the ancient world of antiquity, and, and to try to go back and return to the ideas of the classical world. That's what all of these Rosicrucians and Freemasons and philosophers wanted. That's why they have the compass. The ruler and the compass to represent the order of the. There is this belief that the universe can be measured. A famous Greek and Renaissance saying was that man is the measure of all things. And the general understanding is that man is to take the place of God. That's the fundamental idea of these revolutionary ideologies, is man should be God. Man should be like God or like gods, and that man, by his own ingenuity, knowledge, man can become as God. Man can literally build the world of the divine elements. That's the general breakdown, or a general breakdown of what these men actually believe. 1775 was the event of a major lunar eclipse. And it's no accident that the Declaration of Independence during the time of an important solar eclipse. So let's take a look at this. It doesn't say how Lorenzo Ricci or oh yeah, also the colonies had switched from the. All right, so there was a solar eclipse on July 18th of 1776. Okay, so there was a solar eclipse, and it happened at 68 degrees 12 longitude, 65 degrees 6 latitude west. Okay, it was 68 degrees and 65 degrees to 6 west latitude. But it says that this was in Antarctica. Let's see here. This solar eclipse was in Antarctica. Okay, it says that there was an eclipse in February 21st January 1776, 19th February 1776, 15th July 1776, 14th August 1776. So there was there was 4 different solar eclipses happening in 1776. There was one in 1775. Let's see here. Topo Terrain Mapnik. Okay, this occurred in Siberia. I do not think that nobody was actually residing in 75. What about the 1st of March? It says that this was a total eclipse. 21, 39, 20. Okay, this happened in the South Pacific. So this is no. Okay, I'm going to take a look at this other one. Okay, this is not anywhere close to the eastern United States. Okay, I really doubt that anybody would have been paying attention to a solar eclipse in Siberia. Okay, so I got one for 14th of August, 76. This happened like up in Alaska. Okay, so none of these solar eclipses or celestial events happened anywhere close to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. What about 1775? Okay, this is interesting though. The 13 colonies changed from the Julian 20 years before independence. So there was that. And it was 11. So it doesn't say nothing about any kind of celestial events. Let's see here. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any of the celestial events of this period. Okay, a total solar eclipse happened on June 24th, 1778. All right, so there, and I guess it would make sense if they did this before then. So here you go. All right, so there was this that happened. June 24th, 1778. The total solar eclipse of June the 24th began in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and swept eastward, passing close to Philadelphia. There, prominent astronomer and probably Freemason David Rittenhouse observed it. His comments on the eclipse were published in one of the first volumes of the American Philosophical Society memoirs. Thomas Jefferson, who was born in Virginia at the time of the eclipse, wrote in a letter to Rittenhouse that we were much disappointed in Virginia generally on the day of the great eclipse, which proved to be cloudy. In Williamsburg, where it was total, I understand only the beginning was seen. Jefferson went on to humbly request that Rittenhouse send him a more accurate timepiece, one designed to be for astronomical purposes only. And then there was another one in 1780, but I'm not going to go into that. In 1780, Harvard College commissioned the Reverend Samuel Williams, Hollis Professor of Mathematics and Natural Philosophy, to observe the total solar eclipse predicted for October 27, 1780. However, the colonies were still at war with Great Britain. Professor Williams traveled to what is now Penobscot Bay in Maine, where the British naval officer in charge of the area allowed him to land long enough to make his observations. Now, why would the supposed enemy allow an American astronomer to go to Penobscot Bay, Maine, to observe an occurring solar eclipse? Okay, why would they do that in the middle of fighting a war with the enemies? So it makes no sense other than both the naval captain and the reverend were both Freemasons. So I think I think the solar eclipse that they were talking about are referencing idea of the stars and stripes from was the one from June 28th, 1778, or June 28th, 1778. And that would actually make sense. So the late 1770s and the early 1780s, there is major occurrences of quite a few of these solar eclipses that happened. Solar eclipses happened around the same time as the signing of the Declaration of Independence, or that the American flag just happened to be a direct copy of the British East India Company flag of the same time. Yeah, I think that the United States was founded on the ideas of Francis Bacon's New Atlantis. I do think that Lorenzo Ricci, and the Comte de Saint Germain were present at the Delegational Congress during the signing of the Declaration of Independence. America was never a free country. The idea that America was somehow a free country is preposterously absurd. Secret societies have been involved in the United States ever since the Pilgrims, because the Pilgrims were Hermeticists. The Pilgrims and the Plymouth founders brought over Hermeticist practices. And in fact, one of Francis Bacon's sons settled in Virginia. One of Francis Bacon's sons settled in Virginia early in the British have been involved in this Hermeticist stuff probably since the Middle Ages. Since the Middle Ages. The mercantile and the Hermetic orders were first opened up in the 1100s. The British have, the English have been involved in Hermetic intelligence and spying since the time of John Dee. And John Dee was a Hermeticist and practiced an early form of theosophy. And he also had a European-wide network of spies in the service of Queen Elizabeth I. It was actually through one of those secret networks that John Dee actually was able to tell Queen Elizabeth I about the Spanish Armada trying to attack England of the Armada, 1588. So, in sense, the American Revolution was a farce, and the American colonies never got their independence from England. They are still to this day run by the royal family, has a mercantile incorporation under the banner of the British East India Company. The British East India Company was never abolished. Anyways, the British East India Company was never abolished. The United States has never been a free and independent country. It is ruled under a mercantile corporation trademark that is owned by the British royal family, the House of Windsor. Its independence. That's all just a bunch of just random lies and nonsense. It's controlled by Freemasons who are controlled by a Rosicrucian mercantile corporation that was chartered initially in 1607 as the Charter of Virginia. The King of Britain, even after the War of Independence, the King of Britain never ended that charter. That charter, the Plymouth and Virginia charters of the 1590s and the 1600s, the King of Great Britain never renounced any of those charters. And the Treaty of Paris that was signed in 1783, nothing about the charters and the ending of said charters was ever mentioned. It just says that the king supposedly agreed to accept American independence. In reality, it was actually just the Parliament that was in his name, that acted in his name, that did that. But the bottom line of what I'm trying to say is that America is controlled by the British royal family. It has always been controlled by the British royal family. And it is, in fact, the mercantile orders, the mercantile guilds, and the mercantile orders that control and run all of this stuff, and America is just the bootstraps of the old British system. It's just the bootstraps of the European hermetic or mercantile guilds. And it like represents, at least in terms of like the liberal ideas of the ancient world and the early modern era, what they want society to be, or what they would like or expect and anticipate society to be. I had to say, yeah, the United States is just completely controlled by Rosicrucians, or it was designed by Rosicrucians. And anybody who says otherwise is just fooling themselves. Secret societies set this country up, and secret societies, the same exact secret societies that act on behalf of and in the name of the King of England, still run the United States of America. The United States is a chartered corporation set up and run by the British East India Company and by the Jesuit order. I have been your host, Imperator of Forge. Thank you for watching. Stay hard!